Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. I'm reaching out to you from the beautiful city of Paris. And today we're going to discuss something that fits with a question I've been getting a fair amount, which is around buying real estate, specifically buying real estate right now, and specifically in specific markets such as Dubai. I've talked about how, of course, real estate is a hyper-local asset class, and so it's hard to generalize, but I'm going to generalize a little bit here and answer a few questions, which is based on some research that was provided to me by a very close friend and really fantastic investor. So we'll include these charts as I go through, and I'm going to try and explain my perspective on it. And you can take it for what it is, and see whether you want it to influence your investing decisions or not. But to me, I think it's worth noting, and might signal whether now is a good time or a bad time, etc. So before we dive into that, I'd love to hear from you guys. What do you think? Do you think now is a good time to be investing in real estate? Do you think now is a bad time to be investing in real estate? Are there particular markets that you think are good, and do you think there are particular markets that you think are bad? I would love to hear that. Now, before we dive in, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, nail the notification bell. Really appreciate your support, and make sure you hit the notify for all so you don't miss out on any of our future videos. And if you'd like help with international tax optimization, residencies, citizenships, bank accounts, company formations, etc., please reach out to me. You can book a call, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer. There's a link in the description below, or send a message to our websites, offshorecitizen.net and offshorecapitalist.com. Okay, so I've probably notably said that, in my opinion, I like to go counter trend as a way of investing. In other words, when everything's really hot, I think it's a bad time. When everything is really cold, it's a good time. I think you have to be careful with both of those, because there's always what they call the danger of catching a falling knife. And of course, just because something is bad doesn't mean it can't get worse. There's a certain sense of buy when there's blood on the streets, but that could also mean there's killers on the streets, right? So there's a fine balance. You probably want to try and wait till fairly late in the buying cycle, as opposed to trying to catch the immediate bottom. And likewise, it's sometimes good to catch the start of uptrends if you can. And maybe you don't sell the exact top, but trying to get it somewhere in that range, which is hard to do emotionally. Well, today we're going to talk about some indicators which are really bad for real estate. So it fits a bit with, I had a call with a longtime friend and client yesterday, and we were discussing UAE, Dubai. He said, are you buying real estate there? Would you buy real estate there? And my comment was, the market's way too hot. I think it has, I just talked to a client the other day who recently bought. He's like, oh yeah, I'm already up 10%. I'm like, oh boy. That's hopefully it's a sign that he bought at a good deal. That's part of it. But on the other hand, the fact that prices go up very rapidly in real estate, which isn't a really fast-moving asset, to me is an indicator. And of course, it doesn't mean that things can't go on. Things definitely can go on, but to me, it's where you hit kind of this risk. And I was talking to actually another friend, maybe like a couple days ago, who was saying, oh, he just got a payout. He sold his company and was thinking about buying some real estate. And I'd sent him the research that I'm going to show you with you. And he said, oh, he was thinking like, yeah, it's probably going to come down, but it's probably going to go up a bit more first. And this comes back to the video that I made back whenever it was in May, I guess it was the start of May, I think May 8th or whatever, where I went over how I thought the crypto market was very overheated and subsequently went down a lot. And the whole point was, look, I don't know, I don't have a crystal ball as to whether things are going to go up more or whether things are going to go down, but I want to enter at a point when the risk to reward is good. And the risk to reward in that case was really bad. And, turned out that played out pretty well for those who sold, even better if you'd shorted. And similarly, I look at some of this, what I kind of mentioned to him was, to me the point isn't, is it going to go up a little bit further? That's a bad speculation. The point is, your risk to reward has gotten quite poor. Whereas if you were to have bought, say, in UAE back in November, your risk to reward is extremely good. So, we're going to look at it from that standpoint. Now, again, real estate is not something where you can generalize really broadly on markets. For example, I do think that Kuala Lumpur is a very underpriced market right now. It's an exception. I think that there's quite a lot of blood on the streets. Do I think that it's going to go up a lot in the next little while? Probably not immediately. And how much it goes up, we'll see. But there's a lot of dynamics there that I like. And I don't think that means it's going to become the most expensive market in the region by any stretch. But I think the risk to reward there is quite good. Whereas if I look at some of these other places, I think the risk to reward is quite bad. So the data that we're going to show you now is mostly US based, but that being said, I think it's still useful. So this comes from a University of Michigan survey, which is the consumer sentiment regarding whether it's a bad time to buy a house due to high prices. And I mean, the chart, as you can see on the screen, goes back to 1978. The highest it was ever up to was about 35%. It's now over 70%. So traditionally, this has correlated really well with peaks of markets or around the tops. And so that might tell you something. Very, very similarly, you can go and you can take a look at that on the Real Global House Price Index, and you can kind of compare it back to the 70s to the present, and you can see how, I mean, it's by far the highest that it has ever been. So, you know, take it for what it is. Of course, there's other factors. Interest rates are lower than they were, say, in the 80s. In fact, they've come down quite a bit, and arguably that's had upward pressure. Definitely there is, you know, much more loose monetary policy. You're in a situation where people's ability to get leveraged is greater, you know, higher percentage of the population leverages, et cetera. But that being said, to me, it looks high. The next thing that we have is going to be the Fannie Mae National Housing Survey. So this shows good time to buy versus good time to sell and the difference between them. And it is at all-time low. So it is all-time low in terms of confidence, and the difference between them is essentially the narrowed a lot in the sense that there's that difference. So that's quite interesting. Okay, that the good time to sell and the good time to buy have departed from each other in the wrong direction as much as they ever have in the history of when this has been recorded. So what does this indicate to me? To me, I use this as an indicator to suggest, well, this means a lot of people are interested in selling. It means that less people are interested in buying. This means you're probably going to get extra supply on the market relative to demand. And based on that, you're probably going to have housing prices have negative price effects. So that would be how I read it. Again, if you have a different perspective, would love to hear it. The next one that we are going to look at is going to be the U.S. house price to rent ratio. Now again, this is very market specific, right? You get all kinds of there's even within one city, you can have a lot of divergence. Within one state, for sure, and within the whole country, a massive divergence. So this is trying to be relative, but I think it's a useful indicator. Certainly when I look at properties, I'm looking a lot at the cash flow that I'm going to get off a property. I'm targeting a minimum of $750 of rental income per $100,000 of purchase price, which is about 9% return. You know, if you can do better, great. Sometimes you're going to do a little bit worse, but that's a ratio that I find is quite safe. If you're in that position, you can afford to have interest rates rise quite a bit, and you're probably going to be okay. You're still going to be positive cash flow. You're going to cover all your expenses, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a ratio that I use, which is, people will complain. They'll say, oh, it's really hard to achieve that. It's like, yeah, that's the point. You're supposed to be going for good deals. You're not supposed to be going for just random deals. And there's various strategies you can use to get there. So basically, the U.S. house price to rent ratio, it has never been more expensive to purchase a home relative to renting. Even at the peak in like 2000, whatever it was, 2007, 2008, when it actually topped. So very useful indicator to say, okay, maybe this is not a great time to be buying. And in fact, you can just think, hey, listen, it's going to cost me a lot less to rent versus buying, so I should probably rent. You know, again, keeping in mind interest rates are at record lows, and so of course low interest rates is going to force up housing prices because affordability is improved. But that being said, it's, you know, how much farther can it go? It's a good question. Now we have the next one, which is consumer sentiment versus builder sentiment. And this is very interesting because if you go back to the bottom of the market, what you would find is that the consumer sentiment had reached a point which was quite bullish relative to the builder sentiment. So again, keeping in mind that our concerns here are people interested in buying versus are builders building? Builders building is going to increase supply. If supply increases, that's going to have a downward pressure effect on prices. And if people are buying, that's going to have an upward pressure effect. So if you have it inverse, right? If you say, okay, people don't want to buy and builders do want to build, that's bad for prices going forward. At the same time, the opposite is also true. And so here in this chart, you can see that at the bottom of the market around 2012, again, this would be looking at US information. And this, somebody was asking in one of our previous videos. So this is from the standardized spread conference board and University of Michigan home buying sentiment versus the National Home Builders Sentiment Index, or NAHB. So yeah, that gives a little bit. And what you're going to see on this chart as you look at it is, look, it has literally never been a worse spread. So, you know, okay, does that mean that we're necessarily going to see a correction immediately? No, it doesn't. But how long can that go on for? And if you have a lot of builders putting out a lot of product, you know, this means that that product is going to have this downward pressure. So something to be aware of. So those are the charts that we are going to include for you right here, and you can take them for what they are. To me, this indicates that in most markets, it's a bad time to buy. So when people ask, am I shopping for property in UAE? No, I'm not shopping for property right now. I'm going to wait until probably at least after the expo. And you know, I will decide whether I'm interested in buying property or not, depending on what the prices are like. If it turns out the prices dump a lot and I think that the risk to reward is really good, then I'll buy. If it turns out that I think the risk to reward is bad, I won't buy. And you know, I'll look at varying different markets accordingly. Again, this is not every market. It's, you know, impossible to generalize real estate markets because they're so based on local utilization, but it should give you a little bit of an indicator. So I hope that helps. If you have comments, please give them below. I would love to hear what you have to say, and I'm going to look forward to seeing you guys on the next video.